And if you were here last week, we looked at the law of Sabbaths that God established, that he had hallowed the seventh day after he had worked and created for 6 days. He rested on the seventh. And that we found there were 6 different Sabbaths. And those 6 different Sabbaths, you had a daily Sabbath, or at least once a week. Then you had a weekly Sabbath. Then you had a monthly Sabbath. Then you had a yearly Sabbath. And then you had the Jubilee, which was 7 times 7, 49 years. And then you have one more. And what that one more is a millennial Sabbath. Now, we haven't come up on yet. Well, that's the dilemma, isn't it? All of those Sabbaths are assigned to Israel. And what they're a sign of is that the seventh day is a day of rest. And the seventh day, whatever that is, whether it's a week, a month, a year, or a millennium, everything will be at rest. The earth will be at rest. Your Bible talks about this millennium in the book of Revelation, talks about it in the Old Testament, talks about, the lion will lay down with the lamb and all that kind of thing. All of that is a picture of the earth being at rest and the Lord being here. Our dilemma is it's 2025, and we had 4,000 years for the Old Testament, 2,000 for the New, and we're 25 years into the seventh millennium. And that is a dilemma. So that's the big problem. And here comes the pat answer that I've heard all my Christian life. The calendars are off. Well, the one thing I hated to do was research calendars. I thought, this, I'll never be able to figure it out. It'll be too complex. And it's really not very complex at all. Maybe designing it would be, but understanding it's not complex. But if the present calendar is correct, we are approximately 32 years late. Why? Because not only do you have 25 years, 2025, into the millennium, but you've got another 6 or 7 years for the tribulation. So we're right now 32 years into what we should be the millennial reign of Christ. Jesus Christ should be here reigning at Jerusalem, ruling the nations. The tribulation's over. The second advent's over. Of course, the rapture's over. The judgment seat of Christ is over. All that's over. And we should be in the millennial reign. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If the calendar's right, God would be late, and God's never late. But we're going to talk about these calendars a little bit. Of course, the Gentile world has predominantly relied upon 2 calendars. And the first one we're going to talk about is that Julian calendar right there. The Julian calendar was introduced by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. I'm sure it wasn't Julius that did all the calculations, but he took the credit probably for somebody else's work, He had some fellows that could figure things out. And believe it or not, Julius Caesar's calendar was a solar calendar based on 365 days, and every 4th year was a leap year. I was astounded. You said, well, that's what we got today, with one little caveat. With one little adjustment, that's exactly what we have today. That made me feel better about the Julian calendar. The fact that it's solar 365 with every 4th year being a leap year. All right? You see that fraction there? 0.2422? Right here in the center, yeah. Well, when we what we call a tropical year, and I'm not going to get into that. There's 2 different. One's a tropical one. This is a tropical year, and you see it's 365.2422. So what the Julian calendar did, they just it's 0.25. They didn't want to, Okay, 0.25. That means that we have a quarter of a day more every year. If you were to just count the minutes or whatever, you got a quarter of a day more. So every 4 years, you'd have a full day, right? That's your leap year. Okay, I got that. Problem is, that's not 0.25. That's 0.24. Now, Most folks said, don't worry about it, quit nitpicking, it's close enough. And it was close enough for about, I don't know, let's see, 1,500 years? And then it wasn't close anymore. The overcorrection, here's where they're adding time. It's an overcorrection of 11 minutes a year. 11 minutes a year. That's 8 days in a millennium. 8 days in 1,000 years. So when 1,000 years went by and a little bit more went by, they thought, you know something? It's kind of warm at Christmas, isn't it? I don't know how it would have adjusted, but it would have been turned 10 days. They started noticing their seasons begin to shift. They didn't lose any time or days in a sense, but they saw the seasons begin to shift. And that is what brought in the Gregorian reform of 1582. They were going to correct for this minor thing that happens only about 1,000 years. Well, actually, it's about every 400 years. There's 3 leap days every 400 years, I believe. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, so they wanted to correct for this slight oversight where they are adding time, and that's what the Gregorian calendar does. First, it's going to reclaim the time that it needs to set the seasons right, and then it's going to let me get myself right here. And then they came up with this system to keep it right. Okay. We know that every 4 years we have a leap year, right? And that year will be divisible by 4. But on the century marks, like 1700, 1800, 1900, 2000, we're not at the 2100. If it's not divisible by 400, it's not a leap year, just for that century marker. And what that did was it allowed them to skip 3 leap days every 400 years, and that kept the thing in sync. Now, if there's an error, it's 1 day every 3,030 years. I don't think we're going to have to worry about it. Every 3,030 years, we would be 1 day off. That's pretty impressive. So I think in 2000, we did have a leap year in the year 2000 because it's divisible by 400. But in 1900, on 1900, that was not even though it might have been divisible by 4, it wasn't divisible by 400, and therefore it was skipped. And this kept everything in line. Now, if you say, well, you're still relying on 2 systems that were created by Romans, okay? And I agree, that is a problem. But look at Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21, look at verse 24. In Luke 21:24, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. I don't think God's going by a Jewish calendar. In fact, the Jewish calendar would you go out of here screaming if you went by the Jewish calendar, because I think it's like about 200 years behind ours. If anybody's lost some time, it's been the Jews. Of course, they've been in dispersion for 2,000 years. So I might call their calendar into question, but the Gentiles haven't. And we're talking about having this calendar 50 years before Christ, or about 46 years before Jesus Christ even shows up. They had this system. Now we're going to talk about the AD BC thing, and I'm going to get to that. But when he says the times of the Gentiles, that's another word for years when he talks about times. The years of the Gentiles. So we're on Gentile time. And I would think that God would give us something that would be reliable, especially when we're trying to believe His promises. It just makes sense to me. If you tell me we're, we could be 1,000 years off, I mean, my faith just goes right out the window. I mean, my faith as far as the promises being fulfilled in my lifetime, or at least something, I would have great doubt. And what I'm finding out is that the time is reliable. If you didn't have a reliable system, the Christians are in the dark. In Matthew 16:3, Jesus said, and in the morning it will be foul weather. It will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and lowering. O ye hypocrites, ye can discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. Evidently, the Lord wanted us to be able to discern the signs of the years, signs of the times. We should be able to do that. Well, everything is pointing toward His coming. Everything is pointing toward the tribulation coming to pass, or the Antichrist showing up. Everything from the alignment of the nations, the technology that exists, that we know will play a part in the tribulation, all of it's lining up, every bit of it. Yet we just sit there and think, well, probably not in our lifetime. Well, you must be planning on dying real soon if you don't think it's going to be in your lifetime. I mean, how did the wise men know when to start looking for the star? I mean, all of a sudden they see this star. First of all, they got to know what it is. Because when they start going toward the star starts moving toward Jerusalem. Now, it's not a planet or a celestial body. It's probably some angel. It's very bright in the sky because they follow it right. The thing stands right over the house. But how they know to look for it? How they know? I say, that wasn't there last night, and I could say they might, yeah. But why would they think to follow it? Why would they think to even start moving toward it? Because they were looking for it. In Matthew 2:2, when they show up, they say, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him." I wonder if there's an Old Testament verse that says there'll be a star. And sure enough, in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, it says, "I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy the children of Sheth." They saw that star, man, and where that thing was moving to, and they thought, uh-oh, that's the Star of Jacob. But they had to know to start looking. And I believe that because these fellows came from the east, you know where they would came from? I mean, they would have came from Babylon, that area. You know where Daniel was? You know where Daniel wrote Daniel chapter 9? That was in Syriac. They would have known the timetable of Daniel chapter 9. They probably could have figured out a few things, I mean, not everybody is, a half-wit. Some people can figure out things. They may have figured out that, if this Messiah, the Prince, if he's going to show up, if he's going to do anything in the temple, he's got to be 30 years of age to even start that. They might have started calculating that. And then they saw that back there in Daniel 9, the only thing that it talks about is his death. Then shall Messiah be cut. And they said he's cut off at the end of the 69th week. Then went 483. I wonder how many years backward we'd have to go before we might see him. And they just kind of calculated that thing. They thought, man, that's next year. Or that's only a couple years away. And they started watching. And figured it out. When he might be born, maybe around the 63rd or the 64th week. Somehow they figured it out. I don't believe God has left us just with absolutely no way to understand, because, you say, well, yeah, my grandma, I know, grandma talked about the rapture every day, and it never happened. But one of these days, somebody's grandma is going to say the rapture is coming and it's going to be here. And we get to that point where, listen, you know what Laodicea does? Laodicea is lukewarm and does not anticipate the rapture. She's standing back going, yeah, we've been waiting for it so long. I don't think it's going to happen right now. I just don't think so. Now, was there any lost time? Well, there was one fellow that came out. His name was Herbert, and I-L-L-I-G. I don't know, Illig. He proposed in the early 1990s, so this fellow just a little while back. He claimed that about 297 years of the early Middle Ages, like AD 614 to AD 911, were invented or fabricated. It's called the phantom time hypotheses. In his theory, much of the early medieval history, including Charlemagne, was either misdated or outright falsified. According to Illig, the year 1000 AD was actually around 700 AD. So, anybody can come out and say anything. I can say last year didn't exist, and everybody laughed because you remember something from last year, right? Well, there's a whole lot of history for those 300 years. It's totally, utterly, completely debunked. There's no phantom missing 300 years. Now, I know we get to thinking, back then, they didn't know what day of the week it was. You'd be surprised what they knew. I mean, in 46 AD, they knew there was a 365 solar year. In 46 BC. They knew a lot more than you think they did. Now, it is true, because it's interesting he picks that period of time. It is true that this period that the Roman Catholic Church was guilty of sparsely documenting time and events. That's why we call it the Dark Ages. Of all the groups you would think that would document something, it's the Roman Catholic Church that does it. They just kind of, make it up as they go. If all there was just that, maybe there's something to it. Maybe 25 years is missing out of that 300. I mean, maybe we can just draw a conclusion that yes, we have, the calendars are off, the time was lost during the Dark Ages. But it wasn't the Dark Ages all over the earth. And that's why we have this glaring evidence that there was no phantom years, and guess what? It doesn't look like there's any lost time either. Now, I'm going to give you 4 things that shows that there is no lost time. And if there is any time lost, we could be talking a day, maybe a couple days. It's a possibility, but nothing much more than that. All right, so here's the first one. So there's 4 chronological systems that leave no doubt. And the first one is written records from multiple cultures. All right? Let's say, you live in Spring Valley, okay? Nothing's happened in Spring Valley for a month. I mean nothing, man. It's like the place doesn't even exist. And you say, see, there's a month there where nothing happened. It didn't happen. That month didn't happen. But when you turn on the news, something did happen in Dayton. Because something's always happening in Dayton, right? Or you see something happen in Xenia. On that day, the day that nothing happened in Spring Valley, something happened over here. So what could be sparse information in Europe, China could have recorded things. Now, they had to figure out their system and everything, but they have ways of doing that. Or if it wasn't China, it could have been the Islamic nations. They were doing some stuff and recorded some things. It wasn't just Europe, that dropped the ball, but others were. The Americas, there was something going on. Somebody recorded something, chiseled it out on a rock if they had to. But anywhere, and again, let's talk about the time frame that we are discussing here. We are not talking 6,000 years. We are talking 2,000. We are talking 2,000 years, and there have been 4 empires that have been on this earth prior to that dating system. And the last empire, the Roman Empire, is the one that invented it. So somebody recorded something on that day, every day, and there is no broken record anywhere. When you take the sum total of the entire earth, man, you've got quite a list of events. Because if it didn't happen here, something happened over here. Does that make sense? And they're able to compile it. Then there's dendrochronology, which is tree rings. Pretty accurate, wouldn't you say? Tree rings? Get a ring every year? Well, they've got some, these great basin bristlecone pines in California. The oldest living one, or at least they thought was the oldest living one, was named Methuselah. It was 4,850 years old. I don't know how they know that without cutting into it and counting the rings, but I'll take their word for it. And another unnamed bristlecone found in 2012 is slightly older, over 5,000 years. You know, that's prior to the flood. Now, I don't know if I'm to believe that these survived the flood, but something survived the flood, and we had trees after that. In fact, grown trees. So, I mean, if Noah was waiting for a tree to grow up to get a leaf off of it, he'd have been waiting a lot longer than he was. Those trees survived the flood. Some did. And evidently these did because they're dated before the flood. They're pre-flood. So imagine you got all these rings and it's unbroken going backwards. And it's an independent timekeeping system. You can't blame it on error. Can't blame it on, In fact, those tree rings, they would show you whether there was drought conditions, whether there was fire. I mean, they kind of told a story themselves when you looked at the tree rings. In fact, they call when they have a fire, they call that dendropyrochronology. And there's people that study this stuff, Are they deadly? Are they completely and totally accurate? Maybe not, maybe not. I don't think they could be off too much. But then there's archaeology. This is number 3. Archaeology has some less reliable sources, but still they have some sources. Do you know that ice cores can tell layers? Go to the Arctic, do some ice coring. I would imagine it's not the most reliable, but it'll tell you some things. Do you know that volcanic ash layers can also give you time frames? You know that when you have any environmental catastrophe, events that leave evidence or scars, like mudslides, floods, tornadoes, typhoons, hurricanes, fires, doesn't matter what it is. If it leaves, first of all, people record those things. You just don't have a hurricane blow in and nobody writes it down. Somebody's going to write down in their little diary, man, we had a real storm today. Right? They're going to record it. So archaeology, just looking at things, gives them an idea of time. Gives them an idea of time. But the last one, see, you could throw this thing at me like, just science. There you are, trusting science. I can hear him now, he's trusting science. He's forsaken the Bible. Well, I'm afraid God gave us science. He's the one that gave us science. Now, he didn't give us false science. That's what we're being given when we're told that, everything evolved. But he did give us science. And I'll prove that to you. Look at Genesis 1:14. Genesis 1:14. And this is the astronomical events. Genesis 1:14, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, seasons, for days and times, years. Isn't that what it says? I mean, we count days and years by the sun coming up, going down, 365. I mean, that's how we're counting, right? You know, there are certain things that happen with precise timing. Eclipses. You know, you remember the full eclipse we had, what is it, about a year ago, 2 years ago, something like that? Did they have it down to the minute? Even in your time zone, they had it down to the minute. You knew when, okay, you go out there, you say, okay, get ready, here we go. And look up, here it came. How'd they do that? Because they know consistently when that's going to take place, because they know the revolutions, they know the revolving, they've got it all counted. Somebody has done the math, and the math doesn't lie. So whenever you had an eclipse, especially like that one, who didn't write it down? Who didn't remember it? Who didn't record it? What paper was it not in? What stone was it not chiseled on? Every pagan in the world will write down an eclipse because to him it's got to be a sign. That's what it says, they're signs. So they can backtrack. They can say, well, in this year there was an eclipse, and they go to that culture. And sure enough, they find it right where it should be. Exactly on that day. They recorded it. But the same is true with comets. Comets give you a longer, some of those are like, 14 years, 40 years. I don't know how many comets there are out there that are visible. I remember the Hale-Bopp. I was over in Romania when the Hale-Bopp came along. I watched it every night. Went out there and looked at it. Could see the big tail. And that thing probably, it has a certain route that it takes. It comes back around, and if it's every 40 years or whatever it is, guess what they can do? They can go backward with it. Say it should have showed up here in this hemisphere, and it should be recorded about this date, and they'll go there. And sure enough, they start saying, hey, we're seeing a comet. Maybe they don't call it Hale-Bopp. Maybe they call it Bebop. But they've got something recorded that they saw a comet. That's time. And you put those four together, and you can piece together whether there's any time lost. And there's not. If you found a day, you'd be lucky. One day. Now they make adjustments, and we'll get to that. So let's talk about the contentious 4-year discrepancy that's recorded in Ussher's chronology. If you have a Ruckman Study Bible, if you went to the first page, it would say 4004 BC. If you went to Matthew chapter 1 in the birth of Christ, I believe, let's see, it'll say BC 4, okay? Born 4 years before he was born. And that's always been confusing, and it's still confusing, but now the cobweb has finally been cleared. I don't know if I'll try to do my best to explain it. You see that word, that name there, Dionysius? His name is Dionysius Exiguus. Exiguus. It's goose, like goose. And he developed the BC AD system in 525 AD. And he did a great job. It is the system that's used right now. This system's never been replaced, and corrections to the timeline have not been made officially. That's important. That plus or minus 4 years, that was never implemented. Because by the time they figured it out, or at least somebody said there's a 4-year discrepancy, they would have had to gone back and date everything over again, and they didn't want to do that. So they just throw it in your Bible to confuse you. I mean, I don't know. Well, we'll get to it. So our present calendar is still dated according to Dionysius' calculations. Here's the kerfuffle. It arises when a fellow named Scaliger, I guess, how would you pronounce that? Scaliger? Something like that? He wrote a book in 1583 challenging Dionysius' dates. And it all fell to one incident or one event that took place, and that was the death of Herod the Great. And he's only basing it on one source. In other words, they pretty much dated Christ based upon Herod's death. That's how they came up with the 1 AD, or year of our Lord, Anno Domini. The one who is telling you about Herod's death and giving you a time frame was a fellow named Josephus. Josephus was literally there in 70 AD when Jerusalem fell. He was a Roman general. He's a Jew, by the way, but he was a Roman general. He was captured by the Romans, turned, and became a Jewish Roman historian. I mean, it's a weird thing, man. I don't quite understand it, but he was a Roman general. He was there watching the fall of Jerusalem. But he wrote this book series. I have it at my house, and it's The Works of Josephus. And it talks about the Jewish nation. Takes you all the way through. I mean, a lot of heavy reading and whatever. But he talks about the death of Herod the Great. And he says there was, just prior to his death, there was an eclipse. And then after this eclipse, shortly thereafter, there was the Passover. So you have an eclipse prior to the Passover, and in between those 2 points, Herod the Great dies. So Dionysius didn't leave a lot of, here's my notes to back up what I calculated. Probably did, but they probably didn't survive. I got a little problem with a guy that shows up 1,000 years later. Over 1,000 years later, and all of a sudden he finds a problem, but he doesn't know how Dionysius calculated it. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what he may have used, or so based upon that, he says, oh, he's got to be wrong. So what happened was this scavenger starts searching through the historical record, and who knows what survived, but he starts sorting through, and he finds that in 1 BC there was a total eclipse, and he felt like that one is the one that it was like January the 10th, 1 BC, which would put the birth of Christ 3 years prior. Remember, Herod the Great, when Jesus Christ is taken to Egypt to protect him from Herod, who wants to kill him, right? He said after the death of Herod, then he comes back into the land. Y'all follow me? And then after Herod's death, well, Herod died. If you actually had the birth of Christ at 1 AD, he died in 3 AD. That's when he would have died. Okay? But they're trying to correct Dionysius. They're not trying to correct the calendar as such. They're correcting Dionysius' AD BC system. And he bases that all on, well, this looks like this was a full eclipse. But here's the thing. Josephus didn't say that it was a full eclipse. And sure enough, on March the 23rd, 4 AD, there was a partial eclipse. It looked like he'd taken a bite right out of the moon. It was just before daylight that you could have, so the Jews would have been stirring, would have been up, would have seen it just before daylight, and it happened to be the eve of Purim. Now, you know what Purim's about, right? Purim's about where the Jews were going to be annihilated by Haman. Okay, there was going to be a genocide. You know what Herod was guilty of, right? He was guilty of a genocide. All the babies 2 years and under. So it's kind of interesting. This happened on March the 23rd, which is the eve of Purim. And then 28 days later, about a month later, there would have been the Passover. So what they're saying is it's not enough time. That he had such an elaborate funeral that 1 month wasn't enough. So it had to be this January 10th, BC 1. I don't know about that. I mean, it seems like 28 days would be plenty of time to have a guy's funeral, and I guess it was a drawn-out thing, but not only to have his funeral, but for Archelaus to take over in his stead. I mean, we could do it quicker than that today. I mean, when the Pope dies, it doesn't take that long, does it? Because the stasis like 10 days or whatever, you know, where we get to look at his mug through a glass. He's like he's in a chiffon dish or something. I don't know. Anyway, so you can find all this in Matthew chapter 2, verse 19 to 22, where, you know, the Lord, they take the Lord Jesus and they flee into Egypt. It says after the death of Herod, they come back, and it says Archelaus reigned in his stead. And it's talking about that. Well, you know, based on a guy in 1582, all of a sudden finding, well, I don't think that really fits. And by the way, both of these are registered with NASA, these eclipses. The one in 1 BC and the one in 4 AD, which would have been right about the time he would have been a young child living in a house in Nazareth. Okay? No, that's where he would have went back to. I'm sorry. He would have went back to Galilee. That's when he goes to Nazareth in Galilee. I'm going to confuse myself on that. Anyway, Bishop Usher was influenced by that because it happened right about the time he's writing his Annals of World History. I mean, I've got that book at the house. And so he puts in the correction and dates everything 4 years going in reverse, believing that Dionysius was in error. I don't believe he was, because if he was, we need to add 4 years to our calendar, and it won't work anymore. You add 4 more years to our calendar, it's 2029. And well, it won't work for my system, but I don't think it just puts us later and later into the millennium with no answer. With no answer, and there's got to be an answer. Now I am going to tell you about the days that they skipped. They skipped 10 days because they were 10 days off. The seasons were 10 days off. So and by the way, this is Pope Gregory the 13th. Yeah. When he replaced the Julian calendar, there was a 10-day drift seasonally. No time was ever lost. It's just a correction. It's a correction of the seasons and everything. You still have one day after another that's accounted for, and of course these are accounted for. So the day following Thursday, October 4th, 1582, was Friday, October 15th. So if you schedule your vacation for that time frame, man, you got ripped off. You got to go back to, I got to go back to work tomorrow. It's the 15th. I took off on the 4th. That was a joke. Okay. Now this is no different than the Jews adding a month. And they do it quite often. I found out even the Jewish year is not even a full 360, much less 365. So they're adding like every 19 years, they're adding like 7 times they're adding this month, because they just keep having to adjust. Now that's the Lord's calendar for Israel, and there's something to it. I don't understand all that, but I'll leave them to that. But our calendar, our solar calendar, a little bit more correct, and our years a little bit more complete without having to do anything to them. And we should never have to correct. I mean, for 3,030 years, we shouldn't have to correct not even one day with the system that we have. Summation, the premise that years have been lost and that is why our calendar is not correct have been completely debunked. I agree with that. In fact, our calendar, to be incorrect with 25 plus additional years would mean years were added, not subtracted. We're not talking about lost time, we're talking about added time. You would think they lost a year, like one of the rumors was that the popes didn't like, the Pope in 1313 said, no, I'm not having 2 13s. So he just made it 1314, skipped a year. I don't think anybody's going to let him do that. You can't do that because you've got a whole, this is the world's church. You just can't be messing around with because it messes around with everybody, all the nations, because, Pope Leo the 13th or something on 1313 didn't want that extra 13 in there. I don't know. So, at best, there might be a day, maybe two. Maybe that's why the Bible says the day or the hour knoweth no man. But he says the times and seasons, we know what the times are. We are in the last times. We know the seasons too. If you understand those feasts in that Old Testament, you know the seasons. So what I'm going to do next week is I'm going to give you, and I've already done this, but I don't feel like everybody, it was too fast and it lacked some things that I needed to figure out, and I think I understand them better now. But I'm going to give you what I believe is the solution, if I'm right. And there's next week, and then there'll be one more week after that, or maybe I'll do it all in 1 week, we'll see. But if I'm right, certain things must happen. If they don't, I'm wrong. Is that clear? And you'll be able to see it within the next year or year and a half. And if you do see those things within the next year and a half, you don't have another month or two. In fact, you don't have any time left. They will be unfolding, and then it'll happen. You say, why? Time's up. Not my time. I didn't set up this time thing. God did. He set up the Sabbath. I didn't do it. I'm just going by what he says. And he holds people to those Sabbaths. He holds Israel to those Sabbaths. Are you going to tell me that God himself is not going to live up to his own Sabbath? So what happened? Why are we 25 years farther than we should be? I'll give you an answer. I think it's a good one. I think it holds water. And if it's true, you're within 18 months of going out of here. That's if it's on that. It could be even earlier. It could be next year. Can't be this year, that the season's gone past us, but it can be next year. All right, and I'm not going to say, well, the rapture's imminent, you can be raptured anytime. That's probably true. The only thing that I have concerned about that is, what are you going to do in between if the rapture happens here and the tribulation starts up here? What is that no man's land time zone we've got now? It doesn't exist in the Bible? Go back here and look. He gives Israel this time frame, then he says, 70 weeks are determined upon my people. When that 70 weeks stalled out in Acts chapter 7, and 483 plus some days had transpired, it stopped and church age began. He said 2 days. After 2 days. After 2 days. What happens? Tribulation. What's remaining? About a week. I don't see any extra time anywhere, do you? Do you see any other time frames or any timelines that are given? I don't see any. Well, why would you add something? If you don't have a Bible for it, why would you start adding this indefinite period of time? You mean like an amillennialist would? No, there's no cause for that. God is right on the money. I mean, this thing's going to be right on the day. There's just one little thing you had to figure out. And I hope I got it. If not, let's put it this way. If I got it right, and I don't know, somebody else could have seen this before me. I mean, I don't think I'm the only one that has seen it. But if I am, I'll be a great theologian. If I'm not, I'll be a heretic. So we'll see. That's why I'm going to give you some things to look for, because there are certain things that have to line up for the tribulation to just pick up and go. I know you say signs. Well, definitely things that you can see, you can check on, you can keep your eye on, and if they start happening, right now, man, it's almost like it's in the reverse. It's almost in the reverse. Everything's looking good here. Everything's looking strong over in Israel. There's everybody's kind of thinking, yeah, man, that's got to change. And if it's according to the time system I think we're on, it has to change mighty quick. You might not make it out of this fall before some of this stuff starts to happen. You're not going to like it. But I'm going to tell you what it is. Some of it you're not going to like. But if you knew you was getting out of here soon, well, you might say, well, You know, that's tough to swallow, but, you know, give it here. Yeah. You know, yep. Yeah. I mean, it's like, you know, let this cup pass from us, but, you know, he said, well, I'm coming to get you, and let me have that cup. Drink that cup. All right. Anybody got a question or comment?